our first session is on regulatory developments. We have 3 presentations for this panel. The first is by Homer Huff, Environmental Sciences at UPA. He's going to talk a little bit about rule requirements for ILF as a refresher, and then some conclusions from the rule retrospective that I mentioned. Then Steve Martin from IWR is going to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the rule retrospective that they did, and some trends and status of ILF programs across the country. And then we'll hear from Dana Hicks from Oregon Department of State Lands. She's going to give us a state perspective on ILF program management and what it means to be a state agency running an ILF program. So, Palmer, please be careful for this.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Rebecca and the team at ILF for putting this together. When ILF approached us with the concept of getting these sponsors and other stakeholders together for the first time in some sort of a national gather, we thought it was a really great idea and long overdue. The mitigation banking community has been getting together every year since the 19th year, next year will be the 20th anniversary of getting the banking community together. And we noticed that just gathering once a year and sharing experiences and collaborating has really allowed the concept of banking and practice of banking to evolve. We hope that this will be the first of many gatherings of folks who are involved in the programs so that we can have that same community of collaboration. We can see it would be really grow and flourish over the years. So I'm sort of the warm-up group for session 1. I'm going to do 3 things. Touch on some of the concerns that we had with ILF programs prior to the 2008 mitigation rule. Some of the key reforms that we included in the 2008 rule to address those concerns. I thought it was important to do a quick review of those because those provisions, those ILF specific provisions, are probably going to come up a lot over the next 2 days. And after that, I'm going to touch very quickly on some of the key findings that the core EPA found when we looked at post-mitigation rule mitigation trends and a report that was released last fall about the Institute for Water Resources. So what were some of the problems with ILF programs prior to the 2008 rule? We had a number of reports that started coming out in the early 2000s that hammered us pretty hard on how we were implementing programs to address authorizing class in one of that section 4 report. Those reports highlighted a number of problems. Some ILF programs prior to the rule had real issues with transparency and accountability, with the funds that were coming in, how those funds were being spent, and what projects were actually being put on the ground with those monies. Other problems that were highlighted in some of these reports were commingling of funds. We had some programs that brought in fee mitigation monies that were sometimes mixed with non-mitigation money, grant money, maybe enforcement settlement money, maybe donation money to their nonprofit. It wasn't clear in some of those ILF programs that those funds weren't mixed together, and it raised questions about whether or not projects that we put on the ground were being subsidized with non-mitigation dollars. Other problems that were highlighted were some programs weren't collecting sufficient funds and weren't charging enough to permit applicants to actually do a project in the service area where the impacts were taking place. Other programs had issues with timeliness, with projects in the ground in a timely fashion, and that raised concerns about temporal losses. Other concerns that were pointed out was because before the rule we didn't have a standard way of reviewing ILF programs and specific projects. There were some places where folks felt like other mitigation providers, like mitigation banks, were being held to more rigorous or stringent standards than ILF programs. And that created concern about whether or not there was a level playing field among the providers. So all those concerns and the heat that we were getting for those led to the proposal in the 2008 proposed mitigation rule to potentially phasing out programs. We didn't know what to address those concerns. And we took public comment on the possibility of creating a mountain. We got a lot of input from the public on whether or not ILF programs should be phased out. There were almost universal support for keeping ILF programs. Some of the compelling arguments that folks raised in support of keeping ILF programs, they provided third-party forms of compensation in parts of the country where mitigation banks don't exist and would likely never go. They provide compensation for a broader suite of aquatic resource impacts than traditionally get with mitigation banks. ILF programs, it was pointed out to us, pioneered the concept of stream mitigation. They also went in and provided offsets to resources where there's not a lot of impacts, the demand might be thin, but we need those offsets nonetheless, such as impacts to tidal wetlands, eelgrasses, mangroves, fins, etc. So they really were pioneers in branching out to different aquatic resource to address different aquatic resource impacts. It was also pointed out that some of these successful pre-roll ILF programs involved a planning process where they sat down with their regulators and with stakeholders in their watersheds and collaborated on identifying projects that best address the needs of a watershed. So rather than just simply what we do with banks, oftentimes permitting responsible, we react to a proposal. With some of these ILF programs, we're able to collaborate together to come up with projects that could address a broader suite of watershed needs. It was also pointed out that many sponsors of pre-roll ILF programs had a lot of experience with aquatic resource restoration and were associated with organizations, nonprofits, government agencies that had a real mission to environmental restoration and conservation, and those were really valuable partnerships. So in the end, there was a really compelling argument that it made sense not to eliminate ILF programs, but to look at the successful ones, take the practices that were making, that were really resulting in successful ILF programs, and incorporate those into a set of reforms that we apply in the regs to all of them. So they're essentially in the regs that came out in 2008, we kept it, applied a number of industry-specific requirements that were designed to address those concerns with potentially ineffective pre-roll programs. There are 8 ILF-specific provisions that were in the regs, and I'm just going to touch really quickly on each of those. The first is advanced credits, a cap on advanced credits. So prior to the 2008 regs, ILF programs sold all advanced credits, and there was really no limit on the number of advanced credits in the ILF program itself. And that got some ILF programs in trouble. They essentially took on more responsibilities and had capacity to satisfy. What the regs allow the IRT to do, the interagency review team chaired by the Corps, is to, based on the sponsors, the sponsor's qualifications and track record, to work with that sponsor to set a cap on the number of advanced credits, i.e. credits that aren't linked to a project site, that particular program itself. And the regs identify a number of criteria that the program and the agency should consider in setting that cap for advanced credits. And just because there's a cap doesn't mean it has to be low. If an ILF program comes in with a really great track record and a lot of experience, that cap can be fairly generous. And once advanced credits are sold and projects go in the ground and generate release credits then are applied first to satisfy any advanced credits that are offered, making those advanced credits again available for sale. To address the concern that ILF programs weren't charging enough for the credits they were selling, the regs have the requirement that a fee schedule be developed as part of a prospectus and instrument. The fee schedule has to reflect full cost accounting. So the full cost of land acquisition, project design, project implementation, monitoring, contingency funds, financial assurances, long-term stewardship, all that has to be reflected in the fee schedule that the ILF program develops and vets with the agencies, and they have the opportunity to comment on whether or not they feel like that fee schedule really represents the true cost of doing projects in that particular watershed. One of the characteristics that jumped out at us of pre-roll ILF programs that were very successful was those programs had an advanced planning concept. So they did due diligence, they did research in the service areas that they were working in, so they had a really good sense of what were their pressing concerns, what was concerns in those service areas, and what were the kinds of projects they could do if and when they got money to do them. So since that was a characteristic of successful pre-rule MOP programs, we made that a requirement for all MOP programs under the regs. We call this advanced planning requirement compensation planning framework. It looks a lot like a watershed plan. Indeed, the components of the compensation planning framework, many of them were borrowed from EPA's watershed planning guidelines. So we felt like this planning process would really arm MOP programs with a perspective on how they would spend money in particular services. By keeping MOP programs and allowing them to sell advanced credits, these credits that aren't yet linked to projects or projects on the ground, we recognize that there's some risk on the part of the agencies there. So we wanted to make sure that the sponsors, the folks who were allowed to run MOP programs, were entities who were going to be around. We were concerned about perhaps a limited liability corporation running an MOP program. So we, as part of the regs, made set eligibility requirements. So only government agencies and nonprofit natural resource management entities could actually be sponsors of MOP programs. And we did that because we expected those organizations to endure and to operate explicitly in the public interest rather than to serve the needs of potential investors. And we also require in the prospectus and in the instrument a list of the qualifications of the sponsor, so that the IRT has a sense of that sponsor's ability to successfully complete the kinds of projects that programs want to do, including descriptions of that sponsor's past experience. To address some of the financial accountability and transparency issues in the 2008 regs require programs to establish an MOP program account. That account has to be set up at a DIC member institution, and that account can only manage mitigation-related funds. An MOP program can bring in funds from other sources, but those monies have to be managed in separate accounts. Any interest that's accrued on the mitigation funds has to be kept in that account used for mitigation, and those program funds can only be used for the selection, design, the acquisition, mitigation of compensation projects. That provision also describes in detail a number of annual reporting requirements that are associated with the MOP program and the possibility of program audits. Steve Martin's going to talk a lot more about this particular provision tomorrow. Another provision that we borrowed from a pre-rule MOP program that was successful was a provision that helped address the concerns about putting projects in the ground in a timely manner. This particular provision requires that land acquisition and improvements be initiated at least 3 growing seasons after the sale of the first grants credit. This was working well in at least one pre-rule program. It enabled them to get projects in the ground in a timely manner, so it felt like it was an appropriate provision to apply universally. To address the concerns about disparity between how MOP programs were treated by the agencies in the review process versus banks and other forms of compensation, the regs make it really clear that MOP programs are subjected to the same interagency public review process that banks undergo. It's a 4-step process. You develop a draft instrument, a draft prospectus, a draft instrument, a final instrument. Modifications to those instruments also go through the same process. So there's really equivalency with how we're treating our other form of third-party compensation, and a lot of transparency and public involvement as well. And to address the concern that we weren't holding all MOP programs to the same standards, administrative standards, and ecological standards of other forms of compensation, the regs make it clear that all forms of compensation, whether you're in an MOP program, whether you're a bank, whether you're permanently responsible compensation, your mitigation plans all have to address these 12 critical administrative and ecological standards. The only difference is when they're addressed. So for permanently responsible mitigation, these 12 components are addressed in the mitigation plan. For example, for individual permits, that final mitigation plan has to be approved by the district engineer before he issues that individual permit. For mitigation banks, these 12 standards are addressed in the instrument. At the time of instrument signing, we know what we have a bank site, so we can actually do all of these 12 things. For inland fee programs, it's a little different. When your instrument is developed, you don't necessarily have any specific sites. You're not required to. So for inland fee programs, these 12 administrative and ecological standards are addressed in the individual site-specific plans versus each of these individual projects when those are proposed and developed. So everybody's treated equivalently. Everyone has to address these 12 components. It's just the timing is slightly different. So that's a quick review of the 8 key inland fee provisions that we included in the 2008 regs to address those prior concerns with inland fee programs. I want to touch really quickly on a report that the Coors Institute for Water Resources put out this past fall. Leading author and brains behind it is with us, and he'll be the next speaker, Steve Martin. This report really looked at existing databases, Coors Form database, Ribbits database, to try and evaluate what are the trends, what are some of the trends that we're seeing 6, 7, now 8 years into implementation of the regs. We were able to look at ORM data on aquatic resource compensation from 2010 to 2014, and Ribbits data looking at trends in mitigation banking program from the mid-1990s to 2014. As many of you know, the regulations look at mitigation banks and fee programs with the new requirements in the regs as environmentally preferable to the traditional primitive responsible mitigation. So this preference for mitigation banks and inland fee programs over primitive responsible has really stimulated a huge expansion in the proportion of this country that's covered by inland fee program and bank service areas. I think this is a great thing. Been a continued increase in the number of mitigation banks. This graph just shows the continued increase post-2008 rule. In the next presentation, Steve's going to give you an update on the latest statistics on the number of inland programs that we have now. Another big trend that we've noticed since the 2008 regs is an increased focus on stream mitigation. Really for 2 decades, there's been an increase in scientific understanding and recognition of the importance of the functions and services that streams provide in the landscape. This has led many poor districts to expand their stream compensation requirements, and this has all been reflected in huge increase, a doubling in the number of, for example, stream mitigation banks since 2008. Another trend that we're able to document in the mitigation rule retrospective report that came out last fall that we thought was the case, but we never actually had data to back it up, was that using banks and using inland fee programs really saves permit applicants time. Mitigation banks, for example, cut the time in half as compared to using traditional permit responsible offsite compensation. This is really meaningful from the perspective of permit applicants who are looking at time is money for them and choosing an option that really for them provides efficiency in dealing with any compensation requirements. And not surprisingly, with a greater portion of the country covered by banks and inland fee programs and velocity through the regulatory program when you use inland fee programs and banks, we're seeing more and more permit applicants relying on mitigation banks and relying on inland fee programs over the last few years. So the growing proportion of folks using banks, the growing proportion of folks using inland fee programs, and the shrinking of folks using particularly on-site permitting responsible compensation. Just a couple of areas of future focus that we highlighted in this report. We're going to continue to invest in education and training with compensation providers, with regulators. This workshop is a great example of that, continuing to invest in education and outreach and training. We're going to continue to invest in database enhancements, improving and expanding Ribbits and ORM, continue to support the development of district and state level guidance and templates that help take the provisions, lofty provisions in the regs and step them down to more implementable guidance at state and district level. And lastly, we recognize that this mitigation rule retrospective report doesn't look at one of the most important questions that we want to be answering for these rules. Are we getting more successful ecological outcomes? That was the main goal of the 2008 regs, is to make compensation more ecologically successful. So we want to continue to encourage independent evaluations of ecological performance. That's
a bigger, broader topic, but it's something that both the coordinator want to support and want academics and practitioners to be engaged in. With that, I'll turn it over to next speaker.
Thank you, Palmer. Any few questions, clarifying questions for Palmer while we have Steve? Okay, Steve, next.
Okay, so what I'm going to provide you basically builds on what Palmer said. And the data that you're going to see, the graphs, the graphics, are all derived from data that we pulled out of Rivets. I'm the course national technical lead for Rivets. My responsibility has been to assist districts in creating records for mitigation bank and input fee program activities and to use Rivets to track those activities. St. Paul certainly stands out as a very strong example of a district that has made very effective use of Rivets. A number of other districts and or programs are represented here that have done an outstanding job of using Rivets to track their operations. Okay. So here's where we are in terms of numbers of in-lieu fee programs across the country as of earlier this year. There are 52 approved and operational in-lieu fee programs. 23 of them were operational prior to the 2008 mitigation rule. 29 of them were approved post issuance of the mitigation rule. About 17 of those were sponsored either by state or local governments. The remainder were sponsored by nonprofits. All right, so to keep track of what you're going to see in some subsequent slides, I want to give you a little map and a little bit of a framework. This is all viewed in, I've organized this data in terms of core regulatory divisions. They don't necessarily bear that much resemblance to states. They're aggregations of geographic areas. The acronyms are very simple, very straightforward. Even if you're not familiar with them, you can rapidly figure them out. So we've got Northwest Division, South Pacific Division, Southwest Division, South Atlantic Division. We're right now located in the Mississippi Valley Division, which spans from Minnesota to Louisiana, lakes and rivers, North Atlantic Division. Keep those in mind, and the colors, you're going to see them subsequently in some graphics. So here's where we are in terms of service areas for the approved and operational in-lieu fee programs. Again, this is data from Rivets. We've basically loaded it into a Google Earth framework, and you can see the distributions, heavy concentration, particularly in the East and in the Midwest, with in-lieu fee programs on the coast and in Alaska. Now, pay attention to the distribution, because the next slide is going to be the distribution of mitigation bank service areas approved since issuance of the 2008 mitigation rule. You can see a considerable overlap. 730 plus banks were approved since issuance of the 2008 mitigation rule. Most of them essentially can be characterized as being located from the 100th meridian, basically a line that runs from North Dakota down through Texas east. Roughly 88% of these banks are providing wetland compensation. Roughly 20% are providing stream compensation. And then there's a percentage that provides both. This is going to be important a little later on. We're seeing growth, as Palmer alluded to, we're seeing growth in the amount of stream mitigation. But stream mitigation is still primarily, at least in terms of numbers of banks, in-lieu fee programs, and crediting activity, it's primarily an Eastern and Midwestern. Okay, so as as of this year, there are over 1,000 in-lieu fee projects loaded in rivets, roughly 369 are approved, 350 some odd are pending, 289 are sold out. So those are the rough numbers. This is the spread. This is the location. I've not attempted to distinguish between approved, pending, sold out, so on. This is just the spread of the projects. What's really remarkable is that over 900 of those projects are located in 9 eastern and midwestern states and the state of Alaska. So there's a real clustering of activity in lieu fee projects that are being implemented, and the bulk of those, actually the entirety of them, are from in lieu fee programs that were initially started prior to issuance of the 2008 mitigation rule. But we are seeing more projects being implemented as time goes on. It seems like it's been 8 years since the issuance of the 2008 mitigation rule, but many of the new in lieu fee programs have only been approved within the past few years, and it takes time for them to accrue resources and identify projects and actually implement projects. So what you really see is a mapping of those that have some experience in implementation and some resources available for implementation. Okay, that was supposed to be hidden. Palmer's already talked about that. By way of comparison, we can look at banks and in lieu fee projects. Roughly in terms of acreage, there's 6 times the acreage nationally of mitigation banks as in lieu fees. And you can see that the average bank size is more than, well, nearly 3 times the size of the average in lieu fee project. Now, this is a plot of credit transactions. Just for sake of convenience, I want to refer to banks and in lieu fees as third-party compensatory mitigation, because what they're really all about is providing offsets for a permitting. They provide compensation and assume the permittee's mitigation liability. So if we look at them together, collectively, bank and in lieu fee program activity over time, we can see since 2008, we've nearly doubled the amount of credit transactions. This is just the number of transactions. We've gone from less than 2,000 credit transactions a year up to, we're beginning to approach 4,000 credit transactions. The bulk of that has been mitigation banking activity, the big blue line. The thinner green line is in lieu fee program activity. Now, I've totaled their both release and advanced credits. But what we're seeing is that by 2015, approximately 15% of all compensation, third-party compensation, was being provided by in lieu fee programs. And I expect to see that trend to continue to grow. Okay, here's another way of slicing and dicing the data. And again, the color coding relates to that map that I showed you earlier. This is just wetland credit availability. Rivets allows you to convert credits, which you can't add as you go to different states because of different assessment methodologies. Rivets allows you to convert credits into approximations of acreage or linear feet. So it is possible to roll the data up across a state or across the entire country. So that's what we've done, broken out by core divisions. And what you're seeing is a substantial increase in the overall availability of credits since 2008. And that's driven by a couple of very specific geographic areas. This orangish brown bar is South Atlantic Division. Clearly very important in terms of providing wetland compensation. The bright green bar above that is Southwest Division. That's states of Texas, Oklahoma, parts of Arkansas, parts of Louisiana. And then coming up behind it, the dark blue bar near the bottom is Mississippi Valley Division, where we're located now, and this green bar is North Atlantic Division. We can also look at debits over a period of time. Now, I'm not talking acreage, this is just a count of transactions. And we're seeing a general increase over time. allocated primarily to two core divisions. South Atlantic Division, that greenish-brown bar, and then Mississippi Valley Division, where we are now, stretching from Minnesota down to Louisiana. We can look at those debits by resource type. Here, I've rolled up third-party compensation. I'm not breaking it out into different divisions. I'm looking at national totals. In terms of wetland debits, if we look at just mitigation bank credits, we see a very slight increase in the number of transactions over time from 2008 to the present, to 2015. What's really remarkable is that we've seen an increasing growth in the amount of wetland mitigation provided by ILF programs. And these red bars are both, they're some of both advanced and released credits. We can do the same thing with stream compensation. What you're seeing here is a roll-up of available credits converted into linear feet for the entire country, and what's really most remarkable, as a practice, the bulk of the compensation, the bulk of the available credits, is coming out of South Atlantic Division here and North Atlantic Division here, with smaller amounts coming out of Mississippi Valley and Lakes and Rivers Division and Southwest Division. And what's striking is you're not seeing anything coming out of South Pacific. You're not seeing anything coming out of Northwest Division. You're really not seeing anything coming out of Pacific Ocean Division. Stream compensation as a third-party compensation practice originated in the South Atlantic and has spread first to the North Atlantic and now into the Midwest, and is gradually working its way further west. Stream debits, again, this is a similar chart. Over time, the dark blue bar are credits provided, transactions from mitigation banks. That darker bar on this screen, it's red. On that screen, I'm not sure, maybe black. Those are in lieu transactions, and it's a sum of both advanced and released credit activity over time. What's really remarkable to me, two things. It's an order of magnitude smaller than wetland credit transactions. Remember, I said 88% of the banks out there were providing wetland compensation. It's similar with stream compensation. Much fewer programs are providing stream compensation. But by the end of 2015, roughly 26%, a quarter of the transactions were being provided by in-lieu programs. This is another way, again, to look at it. I've allocated it by core divisions. The colors get blended there much more so than on the screen. This big polygon is South Atlantic Division. This is North Atlantic Division, and the upper bright green bar is Southwest Division. And those are really the centers of stream compensation right now, at least as provided through third-party providers, mitigation banks or in-lieu programs. That's it.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions? Okay.
Very good.
And some later, I'm sure. Okay, Dana. Okay, now we're going to get some data about a state perspective. Hi, everybody. So, I'm going to talk about Oregon's in-lieu program. There's only one, and that's sponsored by my agency, the Oregon Department of State Lands. So a little bit about the agency. We do carry out renewable field law in the state. So folks who are going to work in waters of the state have to obtain a permit from us. That includes mitigation bankers, our own projects that we do. And so we are a separate program, but complementary to the Corps of Engineers, and we have one Corps of Engineer district that covers the entire
state, which is very nice, and that's the Portland district. So DSL and CORE have a co-regulatory program and coordinate to the extent possible. We also co-chair the interagency review team for mitigation banks and any new ILF programs that came along. For our own program, the CORE is the sole chair of the IRT, and we are playing the role of the sponsor or the applicant. So our goals for starting the ILF program as a state agency was really to provide an alternative to permanently responsible wetland mitigation in areas of state not served by private mitigation banks. As Steve highlighted in his talk, we don't have a lot of stream mitigation, mostly because the regulatory rules aren't very clear about what's required. We're currently working on that, so we're anticipating an increase in Oregon probably over the next 5 to 10 years. We'll hopefully get the regulations in place within about a year and a half, so we'll expect a response. But for now, primarily we're dealing with wetland mitigation. So some objectives were, because we are a regulator and we do regulate mitigation banks, we really need to be certain that we're being clear and transparent and we're not giving ourselves preferential treatment. We wanted our projects to provide a clear benefit, and our instrument has ecological project selection criteria outlined, so we really saw an opportunity to keep in mind the state goals for ecological recovery of certain species, as well as just overall general priority areas in the state that we could help focus on to reach those broader state goals. Also, because we were the sponsor as a state agency, we felt like we were in a position, and the IRT felt like we were in a position to be a little bit of a guinea pig to work through some new ideas, methods, proposals, and approaches in advance of maybe what we might have submitted to us from a private banker, where it's difficult to keep to timelines but work through new processes. So if we can sort of go through that process first, we saw that as an advantage. Some examples are multi-credit markets, new templates, and function-based accounting. So we decided early, and this is key, I think, to understand for our program, that we wanted to supplement mitigation banks but not replace them. We wanted to not be a barrier to establishment of new mitigation banks, even in areas where we're selling ILF credits. And so that objective you'll see reflected in how we operate our program. So we were the first program approved under the new federal mitigation rule. We did not have a federally approved fee program prior to that. We did have one that was operating within the state regulatory framework, so we did have a lot of the foundation pieces already in place through our statutes, et cetera. But really we worked within those constraints and set up our initial instrument more like an umbrella banking instrument rather than an ILF fee, in that we didn't request any advanced credits initially. That allowed us to test procedures and processes, address some of the public comments that we received during our public notice, and mostly to minimize our risk for the program. So some of our unknowns, and the reason we decided to hold off on requesting advanced credits, was we didn't know if we could find projects. Would our model, which we established as having an open grant process, generate applications? Because we really wanted to partner with existing conservation entities. We're not a large staff, so us going out finding projects, being the project manager, wasn't a model that would work for us. With grant agreements with third parties work for the ILF program? How does that responsibility and regulatory oversight work? We wondered how the IRT process would function with the state as the sponsor. Would that be a barrier, or would it be fairly smooth? And how would the market respond? As I said, we didn't want to interfere with the establishment of new banks. We wanted to also be sure that we had an equitable process and understand what the public perception of the ILF program would be. So the results from 2009 through 2012 were that we were able to get 3 projects approved through the corporate process, in the IRT process. We had 2 of our grantees were a local watershed council working in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, and our other grantee was a large water resource management utility. There are pretty strict requirements for what qualifies for mitigation under our program, so we found that the open grant solicitation process, is, at least as we were operating it, sort of an ongoing applications are accepted at any time, didn't really generate a lot of ideas or new projects. Mostly what people are thinking of when they submit projects to us or ideas to us are existing wetlands that maybe have an invasive species problem, and they just wanted to try to reverse the vegetation to more native, but it didn't qualify. They weren't doing anything to change the hydrology or didn't have that opportunity. So a lot of those were sort of starts and a little bit of time investment that then weren't qualified for our program. So the grant agreement model worked well, but with some issues, mostly that conservation organizations are always seeking funds, and getting them to let us know that they're seeking funds on one of our projects, because we can't count that towards mitigation, has been difficult. And I work for a nonprofit as well, and that is a tendency. We tend to just go after as much money as we can to help manage the site. So rather than coming to us to maybe request more funds and seeing if that was a necessary aspect, we're sort of having to rein them in a little bit. We did get some delays in getting information from grantees, which caused delays in responding to the Corps. So there's that intermediary partner caused a little bit of problems, but not too bad. And then our initial budgets didn't include time for grantee engagement with the IRT, and that's very helpful for presenting a project, presenting the history of the project, and also on annual site visits to have that on-the-ground partner to really be there to interact with the IRT members. And in general, the IRT process went smoothly. Up until recently, another staff person from our agency served as the IRT co-chair for mitigation banks, while I served as approaching as a sponsor to the IRT, and that distinction in roles, I think, was very helpful for, and that only recently changed. I think after we've established some trust that would we would do a good job of keeping those fair and equitable. But I think initially that was very important. We do have a role in our IRT. It mostly overlaps with what the mitigation banks have as far as membership with the IRT, but we do have ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, on ours. In Oregon, they are a customer of credits, but also build their own permittee responsible mitigation projects and are the sponsor for their own single-user mitigation banks. So they sort of play dual roles and really give us a good perspective and a good oversight. So because of the co-regulatory role of DSL and the Corps, I think we really understand as a sponsor the parameters and overarching objectives of statutory mitigation. So we're not typically pushing the boundaries of the rule. We're not in it for profit. We're just trying to get a return on our money. So maybe as opposed to mitigation bank that's really trying to get the profit needed to satisfy investors, and they're really pushing how many credits they can or trying to get credits for things that we don't typically accept. I feel like because we're playing the role of regulator and sponsor, it just has gone a little bit smoother for us and faster because we're sort of really in line with the expectations. And I talked about being able to pilot new approaches. So we did pilot a project, one of our first projects, with the Willamette Partnership to establish multiple credit types and demonstrating how crediting and debiting and ledger management could occur. So this is just one example, area one, that sort of is a stream that runs through the center of the property that was re-meandered through the site, is a stream corridor with wetland, stream, and temperature credits. Areas 1 and 3 to the north, areas 2 and 3 to the north and south there use an alternate function-based model rather than our area-based minimum ratios that we typically operate under. And then area 4 tests restricted ongoing agriculture as a buffer. So we had a few effects on the market. Our existing statute was interpreted that we were operating under our current program as allowing no competition with private mitigation bankers. So if there was a credit sale to be had and there was a private mitigation bank, it goes to the mitigation bank. Banks later established where ILF projects were established. So initially we didn't target an ILF program or area where there was a mitigation bank already operating. We were looking for, again, alternatives to permanency responsible primarily. So that eliminated conflicts, but it didn't keep banks from establishing, which is what we were wondering. I think we build trust that DSL is directing sales to private banks appropriately when there is competition, and we were able to adapt guidance and rules when conflicts arose. There's been a positive public response to the ILF program. I think building local partnerships was very positive. Working with local entities really keeps the funds within the community, and that's appreciated. There was a study by University of Oregon Ecosystem Workforce Program, and that was done for our Watershed Enhancement Board, which is a large granting state agency, and they found that every million of public investment in clean water and habitat restoration creates about 15 to 24 local jobs, and the restoration economy develops to provide a marketplace for watershed restoration goods and services, and it promotes small businesses. So we do see fewer permanency responsible compensatory projects in areas where ILF projects are available or credits are available, and applicants like that they can reserve credits for 180 days. That's the length of our individual permit process. While they're working through that, they can be assured that on the back end of that process, they'll have credits waiting for them. So we did modify our program in 2012. Everything seemed to be going pretty well, so we went ahead and changed our program to incorporate the advanced credit process and procedures. We asked for advanced credits for 6 priority areas. We had already developed the compensation planning framework for those areas in the first instrument. We were able to incorporate change to state statutes and rules that had occurred since 2009, and the process to allow use of the ILF funds to get information necessary to develop a project proposal was incorporated. So the rules we didn't feel were very clear on whether we could use any of the funds to do the initial investigation of a site, whether a site would work, even if it didn't end up going through the process and be approved. So we've just clarified that. And then just change instrument language to be much more flexible to future changes in state statute and rules. It seems like we're always changing our rules. So we wanted to be flexible to allow those changes. And our modification process took 8 months. So good results 2012 to present with, in particularly the advanced credit areas. We were able to identify projects in 2 of those 6 areas, had a preliminary review by the IRC, then entered into a grant agreement with a third party, and subsequently began to sell credits, and currently working on the instrument phase, the mitigation plan phase of the IRC approval process for those 2 projects. Our approach really was to not sell the advanced credits until we had a project identified. We did get some pressure to sell within one of the areas prior to locating a project, and the agency decided to go ahead and do that. That was so the first credit sold was in June 2014. We still have not found a solid project. We're approaching the 2-year mark, and as you know, it takes about a year to work through the process. So the 2-year mark is really our time where we go to the court and say, you know, we haven't been able to find a project. Here's how we're trying to address that. We may need some flexibility here. So we haven't found or really been looking very hard for projects in the other 3 areas, so haven't decided to start selling those credits yet. I'm going to talk about pricing in session 4, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but we did change our cost structure. So just for the interest of time, I'm going to focus on that in the session 4. But originally it was based on what the mitigation banks were charging. We found that wasn't maybe the best approach, but so we worked with our Portland districts to change that, as well as our legislature. And like I said, I'll go into more detail there. We also had a run-in with just not being able to compete with banks once a bank was approved, mostly because we've entered into these agreements and we're not able to get the public funds back out of those by selling the credits. Similar situation, I think, if the preference in your state is to go to mitigation banks over the ILF program, as called in federal rule, you might not be able to sell credits once a bank establishes. So I see that as sort of parity. So we had 2 private banks subsequently approved in an area where we had dedicated to a project. We are still able to sell stream credits, but unable to recover about $500,000. So we did change statute. It wouldn't help for that instance, but moving forward, we can compete with a private mitigation bank. Doesn't mean they have to buy from us, but we could at least compete with them. If there wasn't a mitigation bank there when we first started selling credits, and we haven't recovered our expenses. So we're trying to take unique approaches to avoid competition, such as exploring partnerships, even partnerships with bankers, maybe being that initial customer with the ILF credits that we've sold, and we have sort of that key investor, so to speak, that would be their first credit sale, and targeting smaller, more unique projects. So quickly, just in a couple minutes, final thoughts, recommendations. One is just to identify your program goals and objectives up front and identify the level of risk that your agency is willing to take on. Working with the IRT often and finding common goals we found is very important. Realize that the regulatory agencies need the mitigation bankers and ILF sponsors as much as you need the Corps and your state agency's approval as well. So I think finding those common goals is important, and working towards those can make the process a lot smoother. We found it was more efficient to take more than one site through the modification process at one time. It's obviously a lot of work to do that. So if you can double up to avoid having to do it twice, that's a little speedier. Lower your risk by having projects selected ahead of selling your advanced credits if possible, and target small but still ecologically significant projects. 3 years isn't a lot of time to turn around from getting your first credit sale if you don't have money to invest in a project. Really, you have 2 years to have a project selected and have enough of a design to start the instrument phase. My recommendation is that's probably not long enough for most programs, but so we're trying to find unique ways to still work within that. Again, target something unique or more complex than a mitigation banker may be willing to try to help avoid not being able to sell your credits. Keep your instrument flexible to the program adaptations that you'll need to make, but language that may change frequently into exhibits and appendices that helps from opening up the whole instrument to review and modification. Be open and transparent. We need to share our results, our mistakes, and what we learn at groups like this. And be creative and adaptable. This is hard to do in the constraints, and so you have to think outside the box sometimes. Thanks.
Any questions? That was a lot of great information.
I'm going to hold this, but I'll only ask 1 or 2. First of all, you said originally you had separate people on the IRT, one for the ILF, one as the co-chair, but now it's the same person. Do you recuse yourself when an ILF project comes up, or how does that work?
Maybe repeat that question.
Yeah, so the question was, at first we had 2 separate staff people, one for being co-chair of the IRT and one being the applicant. So the division of duties, if the agency was more just for workload reasons than anything anything else. So the way we separated it is that old banks, existing banks, up to January of this year would be continue to be handled by one staff person. So they're mostly interacting on monitoring and any problems on those old banks. Any new banks, I'll be co-chair on, and then we're just dividing the ILF responsibilities as well. So if we, as a state agency, are dealing with business regarding one of our ILF projects, we don't play that co-chair role in that case. The chair.
So then you just go to the sponsor and sponsors.
Yeah. So we sort of switch hats a little bit.
And you're the only MVP in the state?
We are, I think, just because ILF fees, not a lot of people know about them. Mitigation banks were incorporated into our rule, and of course federal rule, and ILF fee, our rules were silent up until we created our own program, and then we modified our rules to allow ILF programs in general. So we're trying to spread the word about ILF programs. The state, as an agency, don't want to be the only provider. We want to encourage other cities, municipalities to look at this approach, as well as mitigation banking. It's in our best interest not to take on their risk as an agency, so we're really trying to get the word out and help them through that process.
Thank you. I'll catch up with you later. Thanks.
Thank you.
Curious about your experience with the open grant submission process.
Yeah.
And if there, I guess, the effectiveness that you're talking about that open grant solicitation process was indicative of the ILF market or the number of qualifying opportunities in Oregon or something else.
You know, there's a pretty good restoration community in Oregon, mostly that is grant funded and mostly that works on streams. Not a lot of organizations are used to working in wetlands, and even more so not in a mitigation context. So I think that was a barrier. Part of the barrier is that we were looking at fairly localized areas, and maybe there's not a lot of organizations in some of those areas that play that role and don't have projects that they could recommend to us. Like I said, a lot of the calls we got just were projects that really didn't qualify, they weren't by what we were looking for. Because what we're looking for mostly is restoration opportunities, and those are hard to just drive by and spot on the landscape. You have to research those, what was converted and so forth. So I think a lot of the organizations that exist, that's just not their specialty. So I think that will develop over time, and maybe our approach as we grow this program perhaps and have more money to offer, and maybe switching to 1 or 2 solicitations a year would generate more interest than just having an open process that people forget about. That might be another adaptation we could make.
All right, Devin, and then.
Yeah, I had a question about pre-selecting projects. How do you scale those? In other words, you select projects that are really large, and you don't sell, you don't in the future sell enough credits to pay for that project. What's the mechanism to scale the project based on your projected credit sales?
So we did look at, in the areas where we've established the program, did some investigation early on to decide which markets would bear that risk. So looked at the history of permit applications that did have mitigation, where mitigation banks, again, weren't present, and tried to scale the projects that we were targeting towards that so that we weren't building up a lot of credits that we might not sell. I think, in the case of Half Mile Lane, the one where 2 banks established and were sort of frozen on the wetlands sites, we're still investigating. Steve held this a couple of years ago, and we're going to have to revisit it again. But, looking for maybe unique ideas for how to get that public money back. In the end, it's a net benefit to the environment. So if we're out the money, we're out the money. we did have some funds already from our state-only program that was operating prior to 2008. So it's not a loss. We had the money available that we could use, and we were all caught up on our credits in that area anyway. So it's not a major deterrent, but it is a little tricky to size your projects so that you're not having to sit on those credits for a while. So I would say just work with your local entities on the history of permit impacts over a certain period of time and try to use that as your projections for how many credits you want to try to target.
My question kind of relates to that. So you didn't sell your first advance credit until 2014. Was your funding for program activities between 2009 and 2014 provided from state mitigation compliance, fee revenue for the program, or how did you do all the program activity in those 5 years without selling?
Yeah, part of it was the existing state funds. On those projects, we also had some grant funds involved where we just looked at giving them the credits based on our proportion of the cost. So a lot of those we funded 50% of the cost, we got 50% of the credits for our program. So yeah, we had some additional capital to work with.
Other questions? Great. Well, thank you so much, Dana and Palmer and Steve for a great opening session. We are exactly on time for our break. We'll take 15 minutes. We'll come back at 10:30.